Our next speaker this morning, Lucian Ionescu. In case you haven't had that ring a bell, he's from Bucharest, Romania originally. He has a master's in science from Bucharest University and a PhD from Kansas State University in Manhattan. He's a math teacher at US University now in Normal, Illinois. He's done a lot of computer science work, particularly project manager for about 10 years, done a lot of software design. His main specialty is mathematics for quantum physics. In this talk, he's going to be going more into the kind of mathematics that involves the energy fields associated with Tesla. So here is Lucian Ionescu.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for your patience because of the delay. And I would like to start by thanking the organizers for such a wonderful conference. It's not just extraordinary, it's amazing. Every time you hear something new, it's like why mainstream research can still be, sleeping during the night. It's like physics is clearly not up to date and has to be rewritten. On the other hand, what we do care is about practical uses, so if technology works, let them be, and let's move on. So I got to Tesla conferences and to these topics, free energy and all those interesting topics from mathematical physics, initially from designing mathematical models for quantum physics, and then naturally I realized that everything can be explained in terms of quantum information. So I'll start with a brief introduction explaining what quantum information is. Which physicists call it spinors, Chinese medicine calls it qi flow. Other people call it etheric flow, so many names for what I think it's the same original concept. On the other hand, quantum information and quantum computing is easily understood by mainstream research. So I think that this is the bridge where we can communicate with mainstream research. So the plan of the talk is to start easy with some theoretical aspects of quantum information dynamics, and then move to technology and focus on 3 examples of quantum information flow. One involves quantum optics, another one Tesla longitudinal waves, also called torsion fields, modeled with a different language, differential geometry, and by others called scalar fields, like Tom Bearden and many others are calling it. Then I would like to coin this term New Age biotechnology. So we are starting to understand both technology and biology in common terms. Namely, biofields, morphogenetic fields, and auras are of the same kind of quantum information flow, like Tesla waves, like quantum optics, and I would further connect this with chakras, chi flow, and meridians, and then what are the practical benefits of this? Why we should care about maintaining our chi flow healthy, and how. Of course, many of these topics are well known and better documented into the literature and web, and many talks address these aspects. So I'm just planning here to connect those aspects with the more fundamental description at the level of fundamental physics. By the way, in the afternoon I will give a presentation at the Natural Philosophy Alliance where I would explain how in this way physics can be reduced to number theory. So who is interested in number theory and to see how prime numbers enter into the picture, I welcome you to attend my presentation. It will be at 4:15, I think. So first a general remark regarding our description of reality. We do mathematics and what mathematics is for the brain, I would say it's computer science for computers. And we design first a language, for example, programming computers, Fortran, C++, and so on, Java. On the other hand, with mathematics, there are several languages, let's say differential geometry, which used to be the main language in the first half of the past century, but then algebra started to pick up, and nowadays many mathematical models reduce to flows on graphs or networks. On the other hand, theory is many times author dependent. There are many variants, and it's like software, so it's not like one is wrong and the other one is right, but there are theories which are more tractable, computational, and more meaningful from regarding their interpretation. On the other hand, this will be the conclusion of my research in the past 10 or 15 years after I've learned textbook and mainstream research. So I'm not planning to convince you, I'm just sharing with you what I believe. It's the big picture, and again, there are many good, detailed presentations which go into much more detail of various fragments of this big puzzle. Ancient versus modern science. I want to emphasize that not just the atom hypothesis, Greek science, has or corresponds in some way with mainstream physics. And further, I would say that Greeks were more advanced conceptually when it comes to what space and time are. They were arguing that it has to be discrete, which in our terms should be translated as quantum. So quantum physics is not really something very scary and hard to understand, unless you focus on Schrödinger equation and things like that. On the other hand, conceptually, quantum physics is about discrete and about resonance. So this corresponds somehow with the mainstream physics, but ancient knowledge like Chinese science and medicine, which addresses not the material, what's behind it, has less correspondence with what now it's accepted in mainstream science. But I claim that what she called yin and yang as a unit of anything, like warm and cold, so duality of or polarity of opposites as a unity corresponds to what now it's called quantum or unit of quantum information on one hand, and on the other hand in physics corresponds to the building block of the universe, the hydrogen atom, at least at the level of concepts. So I won't spend more time on this correspondence, but just emphasizing that wave-particle duality is again a conceptual duality between what's local, like local information, which usually it translates into classical information, like 0 and 1 here or there and so on, as opposed to wave aspects which are kind of global and translate into entanglement and other and interference and other, I would say, more interesting aspects. So quantum information, which corresponds, in my opinion, to Qi, leads to a better understanding of Oriental medicine and biology, and bottom line, what life is. If we think that human beings and living creature systems have a hardware built out of matter, we're not surprised to, I mean, we should automatically say there should be a software running on those machines. So this duality, it's somehow natural and I would say not well emphasized. Now, as a brief, challenging statement, I claim that we can think of, in computer science terms, that reality is like a game of life. So there is quantum information flowing in the quantum matrix. So if you recall the movie Matrix, it's like a parabola, but has lots of truth in it if you translate from 0 and 1s to qubits, and the matrix as the living matrix. And also if you think of our bodies as those pods. So it's not easy to get out of them. On the other hand, I would like to emphasize that this computer science point of view of physics goes very deep. And if we recall that initially quantum mechanics appeared or was invented by Heisenberg as matrix mechanics, then we should understand that what he was really doing was quantum computing ahead of classical computing. So it's not surprising that it was immediately pushed back into the old formalism of partial differential equations and waves in space-time, waves of probability or distributions of probability. Namely, the Schrödinger equation picture was preferred and Heisenberg matrix mechanics was kind of left without being developed much. So now let's see what's this business about bits, qubits, and what does this have to do with supersymmetry, which briefly means or tries to unifies, for example, photons with electrons, in other words, bosons and fermions. So, as a conclusion, the world is discrete, quantum, and the material world is essentially at the unit level quantum information. And the unit of quantum information is called the qubit, which should be thought of as a combination of 0 and 1 with some weights. Or a combination of true and false, or up and down. When it's a combination of up and down, physicists call it spin. When it's a combination of opposite polarities, Chinese call it yin and yang, and think of the symbol which represents that merger. Now, mathematically, the coefficients are complex, so I don't want to go to the math code regarding quantum information, but just to point out that qubits are very natural. There is nothing black or white. So only when you introduce a measurement basis, like a comparison, then you kind of split this qubit into the two alternatives. In some way, dissecting this qubit, we can think like killing it. So this is how quantum information becomes classical under measurement. So at this point, we should pause for a second and think that maybe this is what we're doing with the unity of the world when we watch it. And there is a saying, a nice saying in Tao philosophy, but let's move on. What about supersymmetry? So physics describes interactions in terms of charges as sources of that interaction and photons or bosons which mediate the interaction. Now, there's a long quest in physics trying to get a unified picture, unifying bosons and fermions. Now, my claim is that this theory of quantum information flow or dynamics automatically achieves this too. There are only qubits, carriers of information, and gates which process this information, and they all form a network. So what we have around us at the tiny basic level, I claim it can be modeled in this way. At this point, I would like to emphasize that if you want to still understand some experiments and compute some things, it's hard to take into account all the qubits and all the connections, the network. So you would revert maybe to differential equations like Maxwell's equations used by Professor Konstantin Mayl to describe scalar waves. So that's a different purpose, let's say. But conceptually, it's important to understand that deep down, we just have a quantum computing of the game of life, so qubits and gates. Now, let's move to technology. So what we see, what we have, and how does that connect to the picture I'm sketching here? I claim that although technologically totally different, yet they are quite similar conceptually. First, quantum optics with, it's really quantum information at a frequency which corresponds to optics, Tesla longitudinal waves. Again, quantum information at radio frequencies, and then aura and biophotons, so quantum information having as source living systems, all just produce, process quantum information, which mathematically has to do, for those who have heard the term, the SU2 gauge group. So, but if I coin a few terms which are, say, not well explained, don't worry. Think that it's just a link for later to click. Now let's start with them. The examples of quantum circuits, because I said that a network has gates and then quantum information flows through the network and is processed by those gates. So those are called quantum circuits. At the classical level, this is the usual game with 0 and 1 passing through gates like AND, OR, NOT. Now, one example of a quantum circuit is the interferometer, the so-called Zender Interferometer. And it's a version of the double slit experiment, which is fundamental in introducing quantum phenomena to students in physics, and it's considered by Feynman the mother of all quantum phenomena, because it challenges you to try to understand when you shoot a photon or an electron and you have an interference and it can go through two slits, then which one does it take? And then you get into a mind contradiction with classical concepts. At this point, I would like to emphasize that it's not about going this way or that way. The bottom line is that it's not an interference, it's rather a resonance. I'll explain it later, in more detail. So maybe we should start with looking at each, and then how do we, the time, I'm not sure how much passed. By the way, time does not exist, there is only change, so that's a different story. So I might get back to all this and show the picture and discuss it. So quantum optics is done with coherent sources of light. So a light bulb is not good for quantum optics. Laser produces what's called coherent light. So there's a correlation between the phases of the various photons emitted. Then interference or resonance is possible. The picture should show, probably not so well, laser. A laser over here as a source, then a beam splitter which splits the incoming light into two beams. Now again, notice I'm using the classical terms or terminology to describe. Although I'll explain later that it's not the right way or good way to think about it. So, okay, the old picture. The beam is split, one goes this way, reflected by a mirror, then passes through another beam splitter, and then on the other hand you have the other beam going this way, split again, and for example you can take those beams split in, say, horizontal direction, which interfere at the level of the screen. So this is the old way to describe an interference in such an interferometer. I claim that what's going on here is the formation of a standing wave in the loop. And it would be nice to have a way to click on the links, but I don't think we're there yet, because we don't have web access. Okay, I didn't think about that. So this is one aspect. If we would have the web, we could access much more information than you can put in a PowerPoint. So So the Mach Zender, okay. You were controlling it or no? No, it's a link, but you said we don't have access, so anyway, to the web. Well, for next time. No, let's stay with this, please. Okay, thank you. And I said a resonance or the formation of a standing wave in the loop formed by those mirrors and beam splitters. At this point, let me go back and explain a little bit that this quantum information, the SU2, the yes and no at the same time, at this stage can play or plays the role of going forward and backwards. So think of one wave circulating one way, the other one circulating the other way. There is a beat between the two, and the standing wave is formed. On the other hand, from the supersymmetry point of view, I claim that this is of the electronic type, and it's what other people call ether. And the photons do not really go through the loop. The photons just excite this electronic cloud which is like a thin toroidal, which has like a thin toroidal shape. It's like an atomic orbital, but of macroscopical proportions. So the photons, which are quanta of energy momentum, excite the orbital at one point. That one vibrates and shoots or decays at the other end, and we see the dot on the screen. So it's a totally different interpretation of what's going on when compared to the classical picture. On the other hand, I claim that this standing wave vibrating of electronic type is the same type of Tesla waves which are formed in using devices like those manufactured by Dr. Konstantin Mayal. So here we have a different loop, a different loop and a different frequency, but the same type of wave, a longitudinal wave, which is really like a material structure, but etherical. So I don't want to, there may be a confusion between matter and ether, but language is context dependent, so it's not easy to understand what somebody else is saying. Depends on the background also, unfortunately, or fortunately. Anyway, so here we have a different loop. This is, if you want, like a condenser with two spherical plates, and then some wires, and then the coil, and then closing the circuit, and again a coil. So here you get another loop where a resonance occurs when you fine-tune the emitter, the transmitter, and a standing wave is formed, which you can actually feel it with your hands, because your hands are really the best longitudinal waves or scalar wave detectors, as long as those waves are strong enough. Best in some sense. They're sensitive. You have them there. The drawback is you don't have a scale. You cannot measure, cannot convert into numbers. And then people say, well, it's subjective and it's not science and so on. So I'm jumping a little bit ahead to point out that auras and the chi flow between your hands, which forms when you carefully adjust the distance, it's of the same type, and that the hand can feel the same type of tingling when putting your hand between those two spheres, and that all these waves are not really propagating. They are rather etheric constructions. They are standing waves which can channel energy and momentum. So energy and momentum channeled means, or corresponds to photons. But the big difference is now I consider that the energy and momentum do not travel as photons, but they can travel through the actual etheric standing wave formed as a motion, if you want, as a vibration. Anyway, again, as a conclusion, and I want to repeat it many times, quantum information, SU2, it's an etheric wave. It's formed between those two spheres, and it's of the same type as the one formed in that loop using lasers, or between, say, your palm, or the discharges connected or related to Korean photography of fingers. And now let's go back to some more details. About Tesla longitudinal waves. People talk about electromagnetism and electricity, and sometimes there is a confusion. What theory do you have in mind when you say electrons or electromagnetic waves? There is initially the Maxwell-Hertz electromagnetism. And Hertz detected what Maxwell's equations predicted, that there should be a way to transfer energy from one antenna to the other. And at this point, I would like to emphasize there was another back step between Maxwell's version of electromagnetism and the simplified version of Heaviside. Heaviside removed completely the so-called vector potential, which he claimed it had only mathematical meaning, no physical meaning. Now, another important idea I want to coin right now is that this vector potential is crucial, and it is really, or conceptually, it corresponds to the information flow, or chi flow, or etheric flow. So Maxwell-Hertz theory actually describes only half of electromagnetism, let's say the usual half. Those waves have different properties. They decay with the distance, so electromagnetic waves are further away from the source, are weaker and weaker, as Professor Mile explained in the 1/r² law. On the other hand, the Tesla waves, which, and let's say Tesla Mile, because Professor Mile studied them quite extensively, has a theory, so, and a technology to produce them. It's true, reproducing what Tesla did, but I would prefer to emphasize and say Tesla mile type of waves. So these are the other side of electromagnetism. Those are longitudinal waves, standing waves. They do not decay with distance because they are like tiny streamers or bunches of streamers. And now, if you think back of the network and quantum information flow, when a bond is formed, or a link between a person and or between people, or between a person and an object, you get attached of an object used. There are bonds which we are usually unaware of. So those bonds are really the same standing waves which are capable of carrying energy and momentum. So now jumping a little bit, say Uri Geller's amazing feats of bending a spoon, or another Russian woman moving objects, so telekinesis. It's not difficult to understand in these terms. If you are capable to bond with the object strongly enough and then send chi through the bonds, then you can move it. So back to the slide. So from mathematical physics point of view, quantum information as a theory of, well, as a theory, it's really a unification of Maxwell hertz with Tesla mile. It's a unification of transversal electromagnetic waves with longitudinal electromagnetic waves. There are many other theories currently being developed, nonlinear optics, torsion fields, all, or SO3 electromagnetism, all generalizing electromagnetism, and the difference is in the language used, mainly mathematical language used to implement them. But also in the interface, in the terms used to name the concepts. But then if you look closer, you see a correspondence between these theories and between terms. So in some sense, quantum information dynamics is both nonlinear, but that's, again, more theory. So let's come back to technology and practical applications. There's an important aspect I would like to emphasize, especially if Professor Mile is in the audience. No? If Professor Mile, Constantin Mile, is here. Otherwise, I'll brush through it, maybe. So there is an over unity laser-like origin of extra energy. So again, I'm referring to this Tesla wave configuration, or producing Tesla waves between standing waves between the spheres. Now, there is a claim that there is extra energy going into the circuit, and I speculate that it's a laser-like origin. So laser comes from light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. I claim that what's going on is that that standing wave produces a decay of the excited atoms around molecules. In other words, drain some energy from the environment the same way a laser builds its huge power in a cavity. except here we don't have a cavity, but we have a limited volume for the wave because the standing wave again has a like a geometric distribution, so it's localized. So over unity, I claim it's could be a laser-like phenomenon or of origin. Now let's move on to biofields. We all know that we are one and are trying to seek that unity, but when we model reality, we kind of focus on tiny parts. When we solve a problem, if it's difficult and if we have trouble solving it, my claim is that try to enlarge it. Look at the larger context, make it bigger. And eventually things will clarify, and the bonus is you'll solve many problems at the same time. So some people focus, for example, on understanding gravity alone. There is no way you can do that. By now it's clear that gravity is a byproduct of a not well understood electromagnetism. So we'll seek unity of nature not only practically but in our theories. So there should be a connection between, and it appears to be, I mean it's natural to connect what I said before about Tesla waves and quantum information and resonance and all that with what happens in the biological arena, if you want. So I will just start listing some aspects. So Killian discharges, I claimed those are also of Tesla type with photonic activity, so quantum information. Auras, we all know that organisms have a biofield, a field around them. Those auras are of the, I claim, is of the same type as the atomic auras, which are called orbitals by physicists. Also, there are so-called sensitive people who can actually see these auras and feel what Chinese call qi flow. And we all know about qi meridians. So I claim that those qi meridians are, again, standing waves which do not have to have or to be supported by some actual material structures. But probably, I mean, they will follow some material structures like blood veins and all that. Also, the human body is a very complex quantum computer with its quantum operating system should have some points like input-output ports. Are those ports the acupunctural points? It's natural to believe that yes. I mean, it's telepathy. I argued that it's possible because not only those electrodes can produce, again, going back to Tesla experimental kit. So not just those spheres produce Tesla waves, resonant or standing waves due to resonance between them, but also our palms, so our aura. So now what does it take to think that I can produce an actual standing wave which I can project it to somebody else, connect, and then we exchange some thoughts which we don't know where they come from. It's like, man, I'm thinking of the same thing as you. So telepathy is no longer a mystery if we argue along these lines. Okay. Now moving on, some other areas where this, what I'm presenting should be or is relevant, I think. The so-called morphogenetic fields. Rupert Sheldrake takes again this idea that behind the material structure there should be a subtle structure, the morphogenetic field, and that one really controls what the material structure is. In other words, when you regenerate according to what the morphogenetic field tells you or requires. So probably when we get old, the damage is at the level of the field rather than material. So keep your chi high to be healthy and live longer. So the unity of description of quantum information dynamics. And it's a logic imperative. I mean, quantum information and or the duality between classical information and quantum information, it's almost, it's mandatory, it's not an assumption, it's a universal language if you want. So, like C++. Of course, you can use another language to write a computer program if you know better that language. But I claim that the language of quantum information is much more flexible, suited, and goes to the heart of the problem. So all these considerations lead to a natural conclusion. These all are networks of standing waves. When I say standing waves, I also point towards resonance and interaction both ways. That's why I said time does not really exist, so there is only change, and we should focus on modeling change, which is not unilateral. In reality, it goes both ways. There is no cause-effect only, unidirectional. A cause affects or produces the effect, but the effect backfires on the cause. So it's a bilateral or duplex channel of quantum information exchange. So Kirlian photography obviously detects how good your standing wave, your aura is. But now the problem is how to interpret that. And here, of course, it's a lot of learning we have to do until we get so knowledgeable about our own operating system. So it's already amazing what Dr. Korokov does and its team, being able to process this information and tell you how your chakras are aligned and all that. And we should hope for improvements and try to understand better what Chinese people already knew. So regarding auras, as a general, like a slight humorous joke, raise your shield for good health. To maintain a good health, we must keep our shields up at all times, unless we are ready to let guests communicate at deeper levels. 5 minutes. Thank you. Very nice. Also, it seems that auras control the growth and development of living systems as blueprints, referring or interpreting a little bit Rupert Sheldrake. Have your aura checked periodically. Of course, it's good to have equipment to fight our diseases and germs and all that, like rife technology. But it's even better not to get there. So I think we are at the point where we can learn how to stay healthy, not needing to go to the doctor. Maybe I shouldn't have said that, but and I'm afraid it's hard to read. Yeah. So how can we keep aura? So I'll skip aura detection, just mentioning that one point of to start looking into this is Dr. Korotkov's lab of biofield research, and the vendors, are many vendors addressing this issue. So let's focus on the healing. Again, some of the chakras are portals for receiving and sending information. Martial artists can send chi through their palms. The eyes are also portals. So remember when you avoided eye contact with somebody, or when you really looked. Qigong is training in the art of sensing, building, and sending qi. And also Tai Chi is not just a funny exercise for good health. Those movements have a role of letting the qi flow or facilitate qi flow. Now, in how much Tai Chi allows to intake qi from the environment, it's not clear, but probably they know what they were doing when they developed Tai Chi. Various people have various or different levels of capabilities to sense this, but with training, everybody can get there. Tesla lights provide such standing waves and gives you energy, but personally I'm a little bit careful. It's not like it can damage, hurt you. It gives you some energy. Could be like a shower, could be like an electric discharge. But when I experimented with a Tesla light on a plant, unfortunately it died. So maybe it was too much energy. So be careful. By the way, when my wife later on, after a few weeks, started to water it and said, I'll still water you. If you're alive, come up. And it did. So was it the same plant? Same? Anyway, I won't go into those kind of speculations. Reiki, yes, I believe that. I wish more people would have those healing hands, capable of giving you some good energy. And I'll skip this. What is space? Because really there is no space. And there is no spoon either. You think matrix? No. Coils, like rod-in coil, have definitely are sources of chi flow. I don't know, I'm not recommending, I'm not giving medical advice. I want to be clear about this. There's not enough time to talk about rod-in coil at this point, so I'll just mention that the qubit mathematically is like a three-dimensional sphere, which is hard to see. But if you take the phase out of it, then what's left is a two-dimensional sphere, the so-called block sphere. And what you have is the Hopf-torus vibration, which looks really closely. I mean, really, it's the rod-in coil. So we should think about that. Again, there is not enough time to say more about this. But the code which Dr. Foster Gamble was talking about, and many others, of so-called vortex physics. It's really that the basic unit, the quantum information unit, is of a toroidal structure. But notice again, it's not just a toroidal structure. It's vibration of circles. So it's a flow, as the picture shows there. It's not just a lean, smooth torus. Also, from the point of view of mathematics, and you might learn more in my talk in the afternoon, this torus is the topological structure of the so-called elliptic curves and has to do with number theory and congruence arithmetic. So it's a fun area to develop or to start learning. So I explain why this leads to a natural conclusion that physics really reduces to number theory, and the fundamental constants are really anthropological. So because we use big apparatus to measure things. Otherwise, it's all in the numbers, which reduce to prime numbers. So, so vortices, where do they appear? Howard Johnson explains how magnetic fields are really vortex-like. Konstantin Mile, vortex physics. Greg Volt, mathematics of vortices. Chakras are vortices, and so on. And yin and yang is, again, that symbol really corresponds to a qubit as like a section, a two-dimensional section in a toroidal vibration of a qubit. So what? Don't wait to have to heal yourself. Stay alive, full of life energy. We're in worse shape usually than Schrödinger's cat, which that's kind of a joke. It's like, they said, is it alive or dead? I don't know about Schrödinger's cat, but I know I am half alive, half dead. I used to be 100% alive when I was born, but then I started to get old. So I'm trying to see how to stop that, but maybe you can tell me more. Or we can share regarding this. So things to eat, to include in your favorite diet. So eating is good, drinking, that's the usual stuff. Breathing gives you chi.
If you want to take Q&A, you'll have to stop early, but you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. So, breathing is not a trivial thing, and you get chi. If you go and exercise and run, you breathe much more. Then you come back and say, I'm not hungry. Why is that? If you stay indoors, you kind of eat all the time. Why? Your body asks for chi. You give your body food, and it might not contain so much chi. Then you have to eat more and more. Love plants and animals. So connect with sources of chi. Remember the streamers. And the earth has plenty of chi. So love plants, animals, and don't forget your domestic partner, of course. So pray for all, and all should pray for you. And stay away from stressing situations. Well, don't take everything seriously. So, including my talk. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two questions. If the first two customers that want questions, come on over. First two contestants. Then,
Can I pick them? No.
pardon?
Can I pick them?
Let's see.
No.
If we have no questions, was there any questions in the crowd here? So, where are you going now with your EMT, your electromagnetic therapy, and your electromagnetic studies?
I'm trying to use the Rodin coil you built for me. Thank you very much. And use an oscilloscope, and then take a plant and measure it instead of zapping it with Tesla lights.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lucian and Ionescu, thank you
Thank you
very,
very
very much.
Thank you.
We'll be back in about 11 minutes.